Hi, friends. Welcome. Welcome to this Ask Me Anything this afternoon. It's 2 p.m. on Tuesday, July 22nd, and life remains entertaining. It's peak growing season for many people. It's already past the peak for others, but across the people that we work with all across North America, there's lots of different growing environments, lots of different things happening. Feel free to type in your questions into the comments and I will try to respond to those. We've also received a couple of questions in advance, so I'm going to bounce to those to get started and we're just going to have a good time. So it's an interesting growing season, lots of weather variation across different regions as it appears there frequently is, and it's been an intense year for disease pressure, and we've got some interesting things we're working on with that. So first question here is from Ellen Best. Hi, Ellen. Solutions for downy mildew. Is it possible to prevent with a soil amendment? So the short answer is that it is possible to prevent downy mildew with soil nutritional balance. It requires soil that is very good at delivering silicon and manganese and copper and zinc in particular. It requires really good biology to do that. But there's also, Ellen, you haven't specified what crop you're thinking about. A lot of the modern cucurbit selections tend to not have great root systems. And so there is a genetic component here as well. Generally, the varieties, the genetics that are more resistant to the various mildews have more robust root systems and are better at picking up some of those nutrients that give them better resistance. So that's one aspect to keep in mind as well. And then there is some quite exciting stuff we've been working on. We released, what is it now, 2 months or so ago, we released a new product that I've been working on for over a decade that is called Pinion. It's still going through the registration process in a number of states. It's available in half a dozen plus states at this point. But Pinion, as I understand it, has several different mechanisms and modes of action, but it is a foliar application that you can spray on for treatment of a variety of different fungal and bacterial diseases. So in the trial work that we've done with it so far, it's been incredibly effective against downy and powdery mildew in different types of environments. It fundamentally, we shouldn't say fundamentally, but it causes some, produces some very significant changes in the plant's microbiome for the better, and makes the plant's microbiome much more disease suppressive and disease resistant, and also activates some of the plant's immune pathways. So we've had some very good successes with Pinion. You can now find it on the Advancing EcoAg website, and I highly recommend that you see if, I don't recall off the top of my head which states it's currently registered in and available in, but that is a very effective solution. Last year, we had powdery mildew on grapes. I think I had this conversation with Greg Pennyroyal on a recent podcast, and they did, if memory serves me correctly, they did 1 or maybe 2 applications at the beginning of their powdery mildew pressure season, and the effect lasted for the entire season all the way through to harvest. So, and that's because it changes the plant's physiology and changes the plant's microbiome in some very foundational ways that have a long-term impact. So it's not like you constantly need to reapply it, except perhaps in very high-pressure situations. So it's a good question. Thanks, Ellen. Follow-up question here from Greg Pennyroyal. Oh, Greg is just talking about you. I've had the privilege of working with the beta version of FieldLark and have been amazed at the succinctness and accuracy of its information based on actual biological principles versus similar inquiries from other AI platforms that seem to be based on the cacophony of bad information, especially when it comes to agriculture. My question to you is, as users of FieldLark and co-collaborators in regenerative agriculture in general, is there a way of getting our individual data into the AI? And if so, does that need to be moderated to make sure that the information that's going into the system is actually good data? Boy, Greg, you ask You ask interesting questions. So the answer is yes. It will be possible for qualified users, for vetted users, to get their data, training data sets into the AI. And there'll be a couple of different ways of doing that. But similar to let's say ChatGPT or Gemini, something like that, you're going to be able to train it on files that are relevant to your context, your operation, and those remain completely proprietary to you. And if you wish, there's a desire to do so, you can also collaborate directly with Advancing Eco-Agriculture and train the larger data set. And of course, for that larger, or to train FieldLark as a whole so that the information is generally accessible and available to everyone, we certainly will be reviewing and vetting that data, and it doesn't just get uploaded into FieldLark's repository and knowledge base automatically without review. It's a very important aspect. So FieldLark, if I'm not mistaken, FieldLark goes live this week for public use, public access. You can find it already on the advancingecoag.com website. And so there will be public access coming this week. And where was I going? I just lost my train of thought. Oh, there will be the capacity. I don't know if it'll be there when we go live, but within a week or so, we will be releasing the capabilities of uploading images and uploading files and having those files be accessible to work on specific projects. And in the longer term, one of the next pieces that we're working with on FieldLark is the ability to upload all of your soil analysis, sap analysis, all types of different data associated with different blocks, as in field map blocks, and then have deep data analysis on that entire data set as an archive. So that's something that we're still several months away from releasing that, perhaps longer. It's something we want to make sure we get absolutely right before we release it, but that's something that we're actively working on at the moment. Question from Christopher. I have 6 sap analysis on pomegranate trees. I struggle to produce a decent interpretation and action plan. Where do I start? Christopher, I think the place I would recommend you begin, depending on where you are geographically, it might make sense for you to just reach out to the Advancing Eco-Agriculture team to have that conversation. FieldLark, as it exists at this moment, will have some capacity to look at those mineral relationships and nutrient interactions and to make some level of recommendations. But once we release the next stage of FieldLark in roughly, let's call it half a dozen months from now, it will have the ability to look at that data and to make a very specific set of recommendations based on nutrient interactions, desired values, and what's happening and what's going on. So that's the best answer that I have for you at the moment. I see you have a follow-up here. I have a hunch that differential sap analysis gives discrete clues. For example, if a mobile nutrient like potassium is higher at XX part per million in new leaves than old leaves, could the higher leaf part per million be an indicator of optimal levels of potassium in both new and old leaves? I ask because very few sap analysis provide a target range for part per million in the tree. Perhaps. The answer to your question is possibly, but and of course, if you have a relatively small data set, it's more challenging to observe this. But in a larger data set, and the larger data sets that we work with, we look at the crossover points, like where is the inflection point at, where is the threshold where the plant will shift and have nutrient keep either display deficient levels of potassium in the old leaves or store excessive levels of potassium in the old leaves. So it's really looking at the inflection point of where they shift back and forth that is more revealing than just looking at the ratios on a single set alone and just taking the new growth, the new leaf as the optimal target. That can be the case, but it can also be misleading depending on fertilization practices and genetic tendencies and so forth. Question from William Lensmeyer. What are the key plant minerals needed for raspberry plants to resist spotted-winged Drosophila and other insect pressure? So, William, there is a need for a solid foundation. You need the foundation of generous levels of calcium, adequate phosphorus, potassium, silicon, etc. So I'm going to make my comments under the assumption that you have provided this solid foundation. Actually, maybe I shouldn't make that assumption because it's very important to address the full range of the 20-some elements that are essential for the plant to be healthy. So you have to address the entire spectrum. But when you have the foundation of the entire spectrum and the entire profile that is there, making sure that you have elevated levels of boron and molybdenum and sulfur and magnesium in particular, those 4 elements. And the key aspect with SWD, it is usually, I shouldn't say usually, because a number of these berry crops and raspberries and so forth respond very quickly, but it is frequently the case that the leaves of a plant are resistant to insects before the fruit. And the reason for that is because the fruit requires a greater mineral concentration to be completely healthy than the leaves. So you might have a leaf analysis might show, let's say on sap analysis, might show 30 parts per million on boron. But if you do the same thing for the berry itself, the required levels to be at optimal health might be 180 part per million. It just simply has much higher requirements and much higher concentrations. And so if we are working our way up towards having adequate levels, it is very common for the leaves to become resistant before the fruit. So just something to be aware of there. So those 4 elements I would address are the 4 elements at the foundation level 2 of the plant health pyramid: molybdenum, magnesium, sulfur, boron. Follow-up question, and by the way, you can find that combination of those 4 elements specifically designed for this application in PhotoMag. That's what it's designed for. Question from Claire: Do you know if there is any research of observed examples of beneficial fungi that are killed by fungicide use that would otherwise protect plants of the rose family from black spot and other fungal diseases like mildew? Working in a public park, which is still sadly using fungicides. So I don't know the answer off the top of my head, Claire, but I'm quite certain once FieldLark releases and is publicly available, you will be able to ask questions like that of FieldLark, and it can go into exact mechanisms and modes of action of specific organisms. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something different for folks who are listening in. I can do this. I can do a screen share. And I'm going to go to FieldLark. I'm going to ask your question. Nothing better than giving a demonstration of why we're excited and what it is that we're looking at and talking about here. All right, so I'm going to ask the question, I'm just going to ask a simple question. How can I manage black spot on rose? FieldLark has been, I should share my screen here. We've put a lot of work into FieldLark. I'm quite excited about it. FieldLark is, here we go. FieldLark is a large language model, a trained large language model, trained chatbot in the same spirit as ChatGPT and Gemini and Grok and so forth, that has been trained on our knowledge database and archive. So I asked the question, how can I manage black spot on roses? It asks me for a follow-up question to be more precise, to make better, more effective recommendations on context. It's asking about rose varieties and climate and so forth, stage of disease, growing practices. I don't have that information, so I'm just going to ask it to please proceed with general information. Um, so let's see what FieldLark comes back with. All right, black spot caused by a specific fungus, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. And it gives us a combination of short-term treatments, talks about sanitation and pruning, and then we get to foliar applications for plant health and microbial balance. It talks about using potassium silicate and kelp extract and humic substances specifically. And then to more of the question that you were asking, are there long-term things that you can do? And here it describes soil health and biology. And let's just ask, make some product recommendations. Let's just ask, are there specific microbes that can help prevent? So we've done quite a bit of work with FieldLark. I'm very excited about it. And all the users, we've had a number of beta users who've had access to it for the last month. And let's just say the information that you'll get back is much more detailed and quite different from what you will get back from any of the other AIs. All right, so microbial mechanisms for disease suppression. The ability of microbes to suppress pathogens like black spot fungus is multifaceted, leveraging several ecological principles: competition for resources in space, antagonism, antibiosis, mycoparasitism, and lysis. Describes specific mechanisms, and then starts talking about specific microbial allies. So Pseudomonas species, Bacillus species, Trichoderma, Streptomyces. So FieldLark will give you a set of recommendations and you can keep digging here. You can start asking questions about products that contain these species. You can ask about specific subspecies that are valuable, and you can just keep digging with FieldLark. It's a pretty awesome tool to continually dig deeper and understand the root cause of why we have problems in the first place, and what we can do about them. So, all right, switch gears, and how do I stop sharing? There we go. All right, what other questions do we have? Question from John. When we get really heavy rains, John Rosani, our soils collapse and grasses and smartweed become abundant, which tells me our soils have little structure from too much tillage. What macro and micronutrients would be key in optimizing photosynthesis in a soil building cover crop? John, it's the same elements that are at the foundation level of the plant health pyramid, level 1. It's magnesium, nitrogen, iron, and manganese are the 4 that are quite central. And for many crops, you might also consider adding phosphorus, or just making sure that the crop has enough phosphorus. And if you have soils that collapse and lose structure very easily, obviously you have to address, to have good soil aggregation, we need to have diverse microbial species, we need to have root exudates, we need all of those things. And also, you need to address the soil's calcium balance, looking at what the calcium to magnesium ratios look like, because soil flocculation and aggregate structure for many clay soils is calcium is a very important part of being able to flocculate clay soils well for good aggregate structure. That's the one aspect that you want to pay attention to as well. Question from Jen Harris: is there any way to eradicate Lespedeza from a field without the use of herbicides? I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I'm curious how it would respond to intense grazing pressure from sheep or goats. But that's probably a bigger conversation than we can have right now here, because I don't know a good answer off the top of my head. I do know that any plants which become dominant in an ecosystem, so dominant that they just outcompete everything else, when you have that degree of competition, it is invariably because of something that is happening in that ecosystem. Grazing pressure or grazing management, or lack thereof, soil microbial profiles, soil mineral profiles, soil physical structure. All of those pieces play a role, And I have not yet observed a situation where we were not able to change the dominant species by managing those various aspects. Question from Jenna. How do you go about reducing aluminum and chloride accumulation in blackberries during dormancy? Every spring, our sap shows high levels and it decreases as the season progresses. For context, we are located in Southern California and have the greatest amount of root exudates and biomass growth of native annual grassland in the winter. It's important context, Jenna. Thank you for adding that. And this is another question that it would be just awesome to get into FieldLark and start asking these questions. But the aluminum and chloride accumulation are connected. I would say that the aluminum is the chloride is most likely the core driver. And my first question would be, where is the chloride coming from? Is the chloride coming from some type of application? Is it coming from ocean fog? I would expect if you're able to identify where the chloride is coming from and limit that, the aluminum levels are likely to drop as well, all on their own. So there's different pieces to consider, making sure that your soils have balanced calcium levels and don't have acidic pHs from an aluminum perspective. But again, I would suspect chloride is probably the primary driver here. So identifying that, and if you can't identify a source, if it's coming atmospherically from ocean fog or rainwater that has some level of chloride in it, which can happen, does happen by the way, then the pathway chloride, even very small amounts of chloride, just a few parts per million of the soil, are rapidly taken up by plants and show up as parts per million of several hundred or parts per million or even several thousand parts per million in plants because it is so soluble. However, chloride, being in the group of halogens, humic substances have a very strong affinity for all the halogens. So chloride, bromine, fluoride, etc. You can stabilize in soil very effectively with humic substances such as humicarb. So that would be the one approach or suggestion that would be worth trying. Question from Ryan. I have a mid-size organic market farm and we have several high tunnels. We irrigate from a well with high pH water, so I've been acidifying the water with acetic acid. I have heard you allude to getting better results with citric acid. I was hoping that you could elaborate on that. Additionally, salt buildup is an issue in high tunnels, and I'm concerned that the acid injection is compounding that issue as acid plus base equals salt plus water. Any thoughts? All right, so a couple of questions here, Ryan. First of all, I don't have any particular reservations or concerns about acetic acid. Acetic acid is perfectly appropriate and fine. Citric acid is more concentrated and has greater buffering index, so has the ability to bring more acidity per pound of product than acetic acid does, but there's nothing wrong inherently with acetic acid. I don't have a strong preference for one versus the other. And when you say salt buildup is an issue in high tunnels, I don't particularly like the word salt in this context because it can carry too many possible different meanings. We could be talking about sodium, or we could be talking about salts, which are ions, or we could be talking about elements such as calcium bonded with bicarbonates. So there's the short answer is I don't think that acetic acid or citric acid is going to contribute. It doesn't directly contribute to salt buildup in the sense of sodium buildup or chloride buildup. In fact, if you have effective acidifying agents, then that should aid in solubilizing any salts that are coming, or any bicarbonates that are coming in your irrigation water and flushing them through your system more effectively. So unless there's something that I'm not thinking about or I'm misunderstanding, I don't think you're adding acidity to the water is going to add and contribute to salt buildup in the soil. In fact, if you think about it, adding acidity to irrigation water is a common method for reducing salts in soils. So that's my frame of reference and how I'm thinking about it for the moment. Question here from Brian. When will FieldLark be available for mobile? Are there plans to roll out an app like ChatGPT has? So, Brian, this is a good question. FieldLark is not a mobile app now, and I don't know how soon that will come or if it is even going to become a priority for us. So here's a couple of thoughts. First, you can save on. I'm familiar with using an iPhone. I'm sure Androids have similar capabilities and similar functionality, but you can save the open a browser, access FieldLark, and save it to your home screen. There's lots of tutorials and instructions available online all over the place for how to do that. It's a bit non-obvious. People aren't familiar and aware that that capability exists, but you can save it as an app or as an icon on your home screen so that it shows up as an app. And that works perfectly well. So and it has all the same functionality that you would have with an app. The reason we are not prioritizing that in the short term is because we are a small team that is running lean and very focused on delivering an awesome product that has a very robust knowledge base and very robust at answering questions correctly from an agronomic perspective. That's the priority. That's where we're focusing our resources. And the supporting the many different versions of apps that are needed for different phones and different operating systems and different versions and so forth is a lift that we just don't have the bandwidth for at this particular moment. That might change in the future, but that's where we are right now. Question from Keys Frederick. What's the difference between amide nitrogen and urea? I understand that urea has amide nitrogen in it. It would be good to understand what the practical differences are from an agronomic perspective. None. So you might also be thinking about amine nitrogen as well, spelled with an N. But the short version is that amine nitrogen from urea is a very low energy step away from being converted to amino acids, and is very effective because of that. Second question is, what is your opinion on protected urea? Also, are there any other means of protecting urea, as this is becoming mandatory in the UK and Europe? All right, this is a great big can of worms. There are a number of different polymers for protecting urea and having polymer-coated urea in the marketplace right now. Some of them are optimized for biological degradation. Others are more time-based on heat and temperature, moisture, etc. And then there are of course nitrogen stabilizers, urea stabilizers. I'm forgetting the name of the active ingredients right now, but there are these compounds that will shut down biology from absorbing and converting urea into mineral forms of nitrogen, such as ammonium or nitrate. And there's a lot of variability and variation here. So I'm going to speak in some fairly broad generalities. But in general, what we've observed is that as you build soil biology, as you build very robust biology, any polymer that is designed for microbial breakdown the breakdown is going to speed up, sometimes dramatically. We've seen polymer-coated urea that is supposed to release over a 60 to 90-day period, and it all shows up in the first 15 to 21 days in very biologically active soil. So that's one thing to be mindful of. The other piece to consider is I'm very much an advocate of soil systems and agronomy systems that stimulate soil biology, and I'm not a fan of the nitrogen stabilizer products that deliberately suppress soil biology. So the other pathway that we can go here, one that we've been advocating and using quite a bit here in North America very successfully, is instead of trying to stabilize nitrogen with chemicals and through inhibitors and inhibiting the nitrification process, we instead stimulate biology to immediately absorb all that applied nitrogen and hold it inside microbial cells, which happens naturally anyway. Research out of the University of Nebraska, I think it was Nebraska, Iowa might also have been contributing here. This is half a dozen or more years ago. They indicated that 40% of all the applied nitrogen gets held and remains stable in soil in the long term, as past the growing season into the following growing season, absorbed and contained within microbial cells. Well, you can get to, from what I've observed, I believe that you can get to 90 to 100% conversion of applied mineral nitrogen into microbial proteins in a matter of 1 to 2 weeks after application. And that's very powerful because now this form of nitrogen is plant available, but it's not water soluble. And not being water soluble means it doesn't leach. So you have available nitrogen, available proteins without being water soluble. And this has been the foundation of our nitrogen efficiency program product combination that we've put together with Humicarb and Rejuvenate and molybdenum and microbial inoculants, where you apply this in conjunction with nitrogen fertilizer as a side dress, and all of the applied mineral nitrogen in a matter of a few weeks is complexed and held in the soil in the form of microbial proteins. This is really the direction that we should be going. So we are, rather than suppressing biology, we are actually enhancing biology and encouraging biology to remain stable and hold on to nitrogen in a stable form. Question from Kyle. Hi, Kyle. How do you envision FieldLark will be implemented within AEA versus larger agriculture over the next year and the next 5 years? Boy, Kyle, you asked pretty interesting questions. It feels pretty vulnerable to put FieldLark out in the world in a way, because we are revealing our thought processes, our logic pathways, our thinking models about how we approach making agronomic recommendations and how we approach understanding root causes and first causes. And so the reality is that putting an AI into the world like this, it's entirely possible. And I think we should expect that other very significant, you could call them competitors of ours, are going to use that technology and use it to improve their products. And on one perspective, that is a competitive vulnerability. On the other hand, it's the right thing to do for the planet. It's the right thing to do to make this information, to democratize it, to digitize it, to put it out there, make it readily accessible to people. So what's the speed of adoption going to be? I think the rate of adoption, so FieldLark can be used by anyone. And one of the things that we are seeing with the mainstream AI models like Grok or ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or DeepSeek, and any of the major ones that are out there, is that very quickly, because they have access to so much more information than humans can remember, very quickly they can pull information together in ways that are non-obvious or that might not occur to people. So if you ask questions if you ask any of these major AI engines a question about something you know deeply about, like you understand the topic really, really well, my experience has been that it'll come back and 80% or 90% of the information you're already very familiar with, but 10% or 20% makes you go, that's kind of interesting. Let's dig into that. I want to understand that aspect better. And this is because the rate of information growth and knowledge growth is so rapid in the world today. There is new information emerging so rapidly that we can't possibly hope to stay on top of all of it. And so even in a very specialized and focused domain, in many cases, new information is brought forward that we tend to lose sight of or not be aware of. And so With FieldLark, um, Cohen and a couple of my friends from Europe just had a podcast episode a week or two ago where they talked about the significant need for trusted technical advisors, for regenerative agronomists. And I think arguably, I could make a good argument that our team at Advancing Eco Agriculture here in North America is one of the most sophisticated and one of the most advanced, probably the most sophisticated and advanced regenerative agronomy team in the marketplace that I know of in terms of very deep knowledge, deep experience. And when you look at the type of answers and information that FieldLark brings back and returns, all of a sudden, every grower has access to a regenerative agronomist on their phone, in their pocket, on their computer. It's like you get information back from FieldLark that you won't be able to get back from 98% of agronomists, because 98% of agronomists don't know. And I include myself in that, and I include our team at AEA in that. There is so much new information emerging so rapidly that it's extremely difficult, bordering on impossible, to stay on top of it all. And having a tool to be able to aggregate that information, bring it all together, and make sense of it is, I think, a very powerful tool for democratizing information. And so I expect many agronomists will begin using FieldLark, and many growers will begin using FieldLark and will become disappointed in their agronomists. So it's going to force a lot of people to step up their game and to become a lot better or to become obsolete. And I think that's true not just in agriculture, but it's true in many domains that are being deeply impacted by AI. Question here from John Warmerdam. Hi, John. I've enjoyed seeing the success of Mike Omeg. Certainly many of his applications are his. But can you share any successes that come from specific AEA recommendations? John, you're asking to parse out. Well, I think I'll answer your question this way very broadly. Mike's mantra is that there are three things. He's talking in agronomic context, crop management context, of course. He's saying there's three big blocks that needs to be managed well. It's pruning, irrigation, and nutrition. So he obsesses over those three things. And on the nutrition side, it's difficult for me to point out when you say much of his applications are his. The reality is that we are, as AEA, we're very deeply integrated into OrchardView and into their operation. And I would say that all of his applications are ours. They're ours in the sense that they are Mike's and OrchardView's and AEA's collectively, that there has really been this collective brain trust in putting those together. And they are using AEA nutrition blends in the fertigation and in foliar applications very heavily. I would say I haven't looked at OrchardView's program in detail recently, but I would speculate that the majority of the nutrition products being applied are AEA products. There's some obvious exceptions like urea and so forth that gets applied at specific stages. But the majority of those products are going to be AEA products. So I'm not sure if that's really the question that you're asking. I'm not sure quite how to answer it differently, but I'd be happy to have a follow-up conversation with you on that. Question here from Daniel. We're a small-scale regenerative organic farm. It says this year we have had major problems with barnyard grass and crabgrass in our vegetables and soybeans. We have a low tillage system and use a lot of diverse cover crops. Even after an 18-way mixture, we have a lot of these weeds. What advice do you have? All right, so barnyard grass and crabgrass usually show up when you have acidic soil pHs and low calcium levels on the soil surface. And this is an important distinction, particularly since you know that you're in a low tillage system. Depending on rainfall patterns and geological patterns and so forth, It is common. Don Schrieffer talked about this in his book, Soils in Transition. He described how over time, nutrients in a soil will stratify out. They'll start collecting into different bands and zones. And this process is accelerated when you have soils that have poor biology and you don't have a lot of root systems. It's accelerated in annual cropping systems. It's accelerated with a lot of, I was about to say it's accelerated with a lot of tillage, but tillage obviously can have the effect of mixing that back up again. But what can happen, calcium, the top two layers, if I recall correctly, are potassium and phosphorus. You can accumulate lots of potassium in the top quarter inch to half inch of soil. You can accumulate lots of phosphorus. And both of those things contribute to a disease pressure. And calcium is layer number 10. Now, these layers can occur at all kinds of different depths depending on what's going on with soil structure and geology. So sometimes the calcium layer at layer number 10 is 6 inches deep, and sometimes it's 20 inches deep, and sometimes deeper. So there can be lots of variation in depth. But what can occur is that in a low tillage environment or no-till environment, you can easily end up with a very acidic zone in the top inch. You might have, if you just pull a soil sample to a depth of 6 inches, it might be returned showing optimal pHs of, let's say, 6.5 to 7. But if you just do the top inch alone, you might get a result back that is a pH of 5. I've even seen low 4s in the top inch of soil. And it gets even stranger if you do just the top half inch. And what happens is that top inch of soil has very acidic pHs, very low calcium levels, extremely high potassium and phosphorus, and it facilitates very rapid weed proliferation. It's an ideal environment for propagating weeds. So when you think about weeds and weed management, you have to think about what is the soil environment in the zone of weed germination. We don't care what it is 6 inches deep because the seeds don't germinate 6 inches deep. They germinate in the top inch. And so we have to manage that top inch. And this is why I'm of the persuasion that, particularly in high rainfall environments, we should not have a dogmatic attachment to being low till or no till. And that tillage is a very valuable tool as an occasional reset tool. To reset that distribution of nutrients and to manage that top layer of soil. The other possibility, the other piece to consider, again, there's lots of variability depending on what's going on. The other thing to consider is you could just do a limestone application and just remineralize and add calcium and balance pH in that top inch of soil alone. Those are the things that I would be thinking about. Question from Lee. I've recently discovered root knot nematode infestation. Lee, life is really simple. Make sure your plants have generous levels of molybdenum and boron and tell the root knot nematodes goodbye. I know of many treatments, but since I keep vegetables constantly growing in all my beds, are there any faster treatments I can use for soil and for plant resistance? What do you recommend for preventative maintenance in the future? So Lee, you can include in your crop mix, crop rotations, you can include marigolds, you can include mustard, you can change the microbiome in different ways, or you can, well, it's not either or, but another pathway is just to make sure that you have, I would recommend our approach. We have a very successful product combination that we've used a lot in irrigation systems in very challenged environments. It's a high dose of humicarb, a touch of sea crop, and a dose of molybdenum, rebound molybdenum. It's the combination of those things, generous dose of carbon, ocean minerals, and molybdenum will really get root knot nematode to turn their head around a little bit and go in the other direction. So you can change what's happening within soils and within plants pretty quickly, and they can be non-problematic in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. Question from Michael Gold. Hi, Michael. John recently spoke about selenium and iodine for pastures. Where can we get application rate sap testing and ideal levels for iodine? I've been using sodium iodide at 1 and 2 grams per 1,000 liters of water on grapevines. Yeah, Michael, you have some very good questions. There's follow-up questions here. Nova crop tests for cobalt, nickel, and selenium. What are the ideal leaf levels for those nutrients for vines and pastures? I haven't been able to find anywhere to test for iodine. Yeah, Michael, good questions, and questions that I don't have easy and obvious answers to. The testing for iodine, there's some different laboratory equipment or methodologies, kind of some non-standard methodologies that are required because it is a halogen and it can easily vaporize. So that's why iodine isn't commonly measured. There are target values, desired values, and I don't know exactly what, I can't name those off the top of my head, but I would suggest, given sap analysis is already novel technology and iodine already occurs in extremely low parts per million, it's almost universally deficient, I would expect iodine on sap analysis levels is consistently going to show a non-detect, just because the levels are so low. So in this particular instance, if you're particularly interested in iodine, I would probably suggest using tissue analysis and finding a tissue analysis lab that can measure iodine levels. And I have a couple in mind. Reach out to us. We need to have this conversation. Possibly Logan Labs, possibly Regen Ag Labs, possibly Midwest Labs. Those would be the three labs that I would start having conversations with. And I can put together desired values for you, but just as a general rule of thumb, I want to say several years ago, I did a deep dive on iodine, and I've recorded a lot of those notes. But if I recall correctly, iodine, there's variation with different plant species, but as a general rule of thumb, iodine should be roughly half the levels of boron, about a 2-to-1 boron to iodine ratio, if I recall correctly. Question from Bill Lensmeyer. Hi, Bill. Last year, I used this cover crop mix before putting in fall garlic, oats, Austrian winter peas, cowpeas, sun hemp, daikon radish. Could you do a quick review of the pros and cons and other additions, deletions to this mix? Oh, Bill, this is... all right, so I'm just going to give this to you very rapid fire off the top of my head. The oats are good. Love their microbiome for disease suppressiveness, creating a reduced environment. That's awesome. The rest of the mix, Austrian winter peas, cowpeas, and sun hemp. The winter peas and the cowpeas are both trifolium legumes. Sun hemp is a medicago legume. And then, of course, your daikon radish. I would look at this mix and I would say that you have a very bacterially dominant mix. Like you have all of your plants are very early succession stage. You're adding a lot of nitrogen, particularly a lot of nitrogen that is in a microbiome that's going to convert to nitrate with the winter peas and the cowpeas. And so my preference would actually be, and then of course you have the daikon radish, which is a very heavy feeder as well. Now, garlic is also a very heavy feeder, so you're providing a lot of nutrition for that. But as your soil health improves, I would suggest that you go to a species mix that has fewer of these pioneering high nitrogen species. And I think you need greater species diversity and from different groups as well. So I would include a brassica. I would include a bit more diversity from different plant families perspective, include some different grasses, and I would go lighter on the legumes. So that's those are the thoughts that come to mind right off the top of my head. And of course, I'm making those recommendations just looking purely at the combination of species and how their microbiomes interact and the effect they have on soil generally. I don't know anything about your specific soil context or the challenges that you're working with specifically that might necessitate that. Question from Jan Alberg. Questions about calcium magnesium ratio in the soil. CEC is around 10. Base saturations are 80+% calcium, 3 to 7% magnesium, and 3 to 4% base saturation. Potassium, pH is 6.8 to 7.4. How should I add magnesium? All right, so a couple of thoughts. First of all, you can't, when you have CECs that go below 10, you just said around 10, so I'm just adding this cautionary note, but when you go below 10, you have to look at not only ratios, but there have to be minimum thresholds. There have to be minimum part per million levels. So you need a minimum of 125 parts per million potassium. You need a minimum of 160 parts per million magnesium, which you're obviously not hitting, and a minimum of 1,000 part per million calcium. And this becomes important because if you have a soil that, say, you have a CEC of 5 or 7, you can have balanced levels, but the quantity is still too low to maintain plant health and to maintain good productivity and yields. So your question is, how should I add magnesium? Let me see. You're at 3 to 4% base saturation potassium. So that means you're right around 125 to 150 parts per million potassium, around a CEC of 10. So I would just focus on magnesium sulfate. However, I wouldn't add enough magnesium sulfate in one shot or even in a couple of doses to try to rebuild magnesium levels in your soil. That should not be a target objective. Instead, the objective should be to supply enough magnesium for the crop. And you do that for several years in a row, and you'll be surprised at how rapidly your magnesium levels in your soil will recover. Soil is nonlinear. We are seduced by the idea that we can put on a pound of magnesium or of another element, and it will shift the soil by half a part per million. But I've observed many instances where that was, in fact, I would say it's most common for that to not be true. Frequently, we put on a lot of product and the needle doesn't move at all. Parts per million don't increase at all. It's very common with potassium on lots of different clay soils. Or you put on a little bit and you get a lot. It's very common to put on pelletized limestone or gypsum, not so much gypsum, but pelletized limestone on some soils. You add enough to move the needle by 50 parts per million in the soil, and you get a response of 500 parts per million, 10 times more than what you actually put on. Where did it come from? It didn't come from the applied product. So these biological living systems are very much nonlinear. And it's much more rewarding to take a measured, incremental approach to support our crops really well, to support biology. And in most cases, the system will strive for dynamic equilibrium, for homeostasis on its own without the need to add 100% of everything that is missing. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes we do need to add a lot of nutrients on very sandy soils and so forth. But those cases I find to be the exception and not the rule. Question from Lance. When referring to a regenerative approach and considering data, knowledge, and experience, very often the decision maker, the farmer, only has experience. What is your practical entry point when convincing a farmer to embark on this journey? Considering data, knowledge, and experience. Lance, I would answer your question this way. I would build on the experience that the farmer has, because everyone, in my many conversations with growers, everyone has experienced things that don't make sense according to the prevailing worldview of contemporary agronomy. Why does this particular weed species only show up in this location? Why do diseases always start here first? Why does this variety get insects, but the other variety doesn't, even though they're on the same nutrition program? We all have these experiences, and you start asking and trying to understand and relate to the experiences that the grower has. You can relate to those experiences and ask, why is this happening? What is the explanation for the observations and the experiences that you have had on your farm? And you get started asking those questions, and the answers invariably lead to different answers than what have historically been the mainstream. You end up with answers that are framed in a microbial or nutritional context or a physiological expression context in many cases. Question from Omar. How do you solve problems that are caused by high bicarbonate irrigation water that is making soil calcareous. The soil has been plowed by the previous owner. It's become low in organic matter and low in phosphorus. Does rainbox water treatment help enough or do enough to help with the water issue? Is acid treatment of water worth the investment? The farm experiences low rainfall and we have hot, humid weather. So I can't answer the question specifically because I don't have familiarity with the technology that you're asking about. But yes, treating high bicarbonate water with acidity is worth the investment. If you're growing high value crops and you're irrigating, it is absolutely worth the investment. And it's become prevailing practice in many reasons because it works and it's effective. All right, we've got time for one last question. Question here from Aaron. You often say that biopriming seeds is one of the most cost-effective interventions you can make. How does that compare with adjusting the pH to optimal levels? Because the impacts of low pH on productivity are quite extreme: aluminum toxicity, nutrient type, etc. I feel like starting with the most basic limitation on crop productivity is the best approach. Yeah, Aaron, I'm completely aligned with you on that. I've been, when having this conversation, on the kind of the basic foundational premise that we're approaching the conversation with is that there are these foundational agronomic pieces that you have to manage. There is addressing soil pH, addressing soil calcium to magnesium ratios, addressing soil biology. There are these foundational pieces that you absolutely have to take into consideration. And then once you start talking about, so those are, let's just broadly call those soil amendments. So in the soil amendments category, we have to take care of the foundational basics. And then when you go past the soil amendments category, you start looking at crop nutrition management in the season. And now we're talking about fertilizer applications, foliar applications, biological applications. So this is the framing and the context in which I've been having this conversation. Where are the annual inputs, the crop inputs for this season that are likely to have the biggest economic return? And that is where the microbial and mineral seed treatments pretty consistently win that race. So those are the pieces that I would focus on, starting with. But absolutely, I'm in agreement and in alignment with you that from a soil amendment perspective, we have to take care of the foundation. The foundational pieces have to be in place, and them being in place is also going to determine the degree of effectiveness of these microbial inoculants. So if you put on a seed treatment like BioCoat Gold and put it on a soil that has a pH of 4.5 and has high aluminum levels, you're going to get some performance, but it's going to be a lot less than if you've managed soil pH and managed calcium levels and suppressed the excessive levels of aluminum. So I think we're in agreement there, the way that you described that. All right, I want to say thank you all. Thanks for being here. I hope that you have an awesome day and a great growing season. Please reach out to us and to our team with any questions that you have, and please let us know what your experiences are with FieldLark. I would welcome you. We're launching publicly this week. You're the first to hear about it. I would welcome you sharing your experiences on social media. Share it with other people. We really want to spread the word and get it out there in a significant way. So thank you for all that you do. May you have a blessed growing season.